Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP's Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving the extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Third time lucky for that introduction. I always forget what video I'm actually doing when you do so many. Brain just falls out your ears. Right, what should we talk about today? As ever, so much to discuss. I just want to give reference to what Philip O'Brien says here. So sometimes we need to take a breath and realize that what we are seeing here. The Ukrainians, using NATO equipment for only a few months and without air superiority, are trying, and maybe succeeding, in driving back what was considered to be one of the world's greatest militaries. I mean, when you look at this, it's quite a phenomenal thing. Yes, they have been given huge amounts of support, money, equipment. But they have done a really phenomenal job at learning that equipment, at integrating all these disparate pieces of hardware and integrating that into the software, if you like, which is the doctrine, the training. And yeah, it's not going to be perfect. There's still going to be Soviet-style leaders in there. There's still going to be people who aren't going to use the equipment to their optimal and who make bad decisions, of course. But it's an incredible thing to see this army, how far it's come, and the dedication these people have, and how far, I guess, the Russian army has fallen. I mean, we have seen nothing that's been particularly, worthy of note from the Russians. I mean, when we do mention things like, oh, actually, they have adapted somewhat during the war, and they are better at this now and better at that. That's like damning with faint praise. Actually, that's what you would at least expect. That's your bare minimum. They were saying, oh, actually, it's not all bad. They are doing at least this and this. I don't think there's anywhere throughout this war that we've seen at any point in time Russia do something truly like, oh, that was really, really good. What are their battlefield successes? If you're going to look to Bakhmut as being one, that's just a downright disaster for them. The attrition of their troops, the issues between Wagner PMC and the conventional Russian forces, the amount of time it took them, and much of that, so some of that's been reversed in a flash compared to the amount of time it took the Russians. So yeah, I think it is quite incredible, and who knows where this counter-offensive will go. It is arguably, well, I don't know. It seems like it might have started quite well, but with some rocky moments as well. I guess all of this will come out in the wash, right? It's interesting that Tobias Ellwood, who is fairly local to me, down Bournemouth way on the south coast, he's a member of parliament who has also got a military background. He has openly said this. So he said the UK official, or it's reported by Sky News, UK official anticipates major Ukrainian attack in Donbass in the next few days. Head of the UK Parliament's Defence Committee believes Ukraine would launch a major attack against Russian forces in the eastern Donbass region in the next few days. Ukraine's military is conducting probing and shaping operations, and the main front of the Ukrainian capability is still in reserves, ready for that singular attack, Tobias Ellwood told Sky News today. It's interesting because there are questions then of operational security. He's in charge of the defence committee. You would think he's got contacts for sure from his own military career and with it from being within the government in that position. And he may, as well as his own sort of personal contacts, he may well have information to which we are not party in government. But is it wise for him to say something like this, or is this actually absolutely fine because it just floods the information space with options and it leaves the Russians none the wiser? I mean, do they go, oh right, we better go and check Donbass now because Tobias Ellwood's mentioned that in the UK? I mean, that would have been one of, you've only got so many places you can attack, right? You got Luhansk, you got Donetsk, and Donbass is Luhansk and Donetsk. And then you got southern Donetsk that they're already working on, the Ukrainians, and then you got Zaporizhia that they're working on. You got Kherson, right? So you've already got 5 options. To say, I expect an attack on the Donbass tomorrow is kind of like, yeah, I mean, I've been saying stuff like that. I was saying this morning, I don't know what they're going to do with Luhansk. Are they going to do an attack? So I don't think this is particularly worrying. It's so general. It's like, ooh, how's that going to help or hinder? So yeah, that is interesting that he says in the next few days. Um, I do wonder whether we might see something happen in the next couple of days along that front. Okay, I'm not going to show you all of this video because it's deeply inappropriate, but this is reported as being the first video capturing of a barrier unit or barrier troops executing fleeing Russian soldiers. So these are Russian people shooting their own soldiers. It's absolutely horrific. So you have these soldiers retreating, they're running away, as you can see, without weapons. And then you see these guys run out, push them back, right? Push these guys back, and then they shoot them. They basically shoot all of these troops. And it's an absolute shocker. And that is barrier troops pushing Russians back. Now, is it psyops? Could this be Ukrainians recording this? I guess it could. Yeah. Could it be enemy soldiers shooting not their own side? I don't think it is. I think this is genuinely troops on the same side. At least that's the indication. It does seem to be what it claims to be, but always treat everything with a pinch of salt. Okay. Now, this is possibly the just to give you the end result of that is absolutely bloody terrible. That there you go. That's my moral evaluation of that. This is the luckiest soldier in a Russian uniform. Here we have him on the back of an IFV, I think, or an APC, and he falls off the back, and you're thinking, "Goodness me, you left him behind." That's absolutely terrible. And he gets properly left behind, as in they don't realise he's fallen off the back, and they are off. Anyway, it turns out that that is the luckiest soldier around because this vehicle ain't long for the world, as it runs into a mine up ahead on the road. So that soldier, now stuck on his own, probably thinking, well, sod you then. I'm off to the enemy front lines to give myself up. Or I don't know. But he's certainly one lucky little so-and-so because he would have been sat on the top of that as it took the full brunt of a mine. Who knows, he could have survived, but chances are he would have had a headache. Right. What is going on at the moment on the front lines? Well, there's been a bit of a Russian counterattack. Here we have the 40th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet. So these guys were operational down in Vuhledar. These were the elite Marines from the 40th Marine Brigade, and they have taken a hammering in Vuhledar. Anyway, they seem to be in operation around Velika Novosilka. They've taken captive UK-supplied Husky and Mastiff. These are kind of armoured vehicles, and we'll see them here. So we are starting to see NATO provided or Allied provided vehicles in Russian hands, and that's never a good thing. It's not great to see vehicles that have been provided to the Ukrainians. You can see that they've had their tires blown out. They ain't going anywhere, and that is possibly the reason for them being stuck and abandoned. But obviously means that the Ukrainians would have retreated from this position as well. Who knows what the details were of this, but yeah, you can see that's taken a couple of hammerings. In fact, I wonder if that's taken some mine, hit a mine, been abandoned. So there you go. Some UK provided equipment there now in Russian hands, and quite a bit of equipment inside as well by the looks of it, which is obviously a shame for the Ukrainians. Right. And let's move on. So Ilya Ponomarenko, who is a journalist with the Kyiv Independent, says, so the Ukrainian military shows that the Leopard recently destroyed by Russia's Lancet was a dummy made of wood. So this has been going around for a couple of days, actually. He says the guy in this is a good friend of his. That says something in words that I can't read. So we have a Lancet taking out supposedly a Leopard there that has been parked up, but it turns out that Leopard was actually made of wood. Not quite sure what he says, but he's pretty happy that they've attracted the attention of a Lancet and a Lancet operator to take out a piece of wood. And I guess that is a good use of a decoy. Well done to them. Now, talking about drones and drone operators, this next bit of video footage leads me on to talk about something. So it's a bit of a segue. Well, actually, it inspired me to look for something on this. So, your Ukrainian first-person view operator screams out with joy after successfully hitting a target. Now, if you notice, he's basically wearing a virtual reality headset there, and that is what you might expect to see, gamers use, and he's using controllers as a gamer would, and I find that pretty interesting.
Yes! Прям яблочко. Yeah, buddy.
So that is an indication of what kind of tech they're using. And actually, this reminded me that I'd read somewhere that actually they're starting to use this kind of gaming tech, console tech within tanks and whatnot as controllers, both for the reason that it is attractive to younger people coming in, but also actually functionally and ergonomically easier to use as well. So it's not only more intuitive for the younger generations and attractive to them because they're used to using those kind of controllers, but actually just objectively, those kind of controllers are easier to use anyway to operate this kind of stuff. I mean, that's there. You can see it within the context of drones. Let's look at it in the context of tanks. So this is back from 2020, July 2020, article in the Washington Post. A new Israeli tank features Xbox controllers and AI, artificial intelligence, honed by StarCraft 2 and Doom. So, as you can see here, well, we're getting to it. However, the Carmel, so this is called the Carmel, its most unique feature can be found upon entry through the black hatch, which brings you into space filled with equipment often found in the bedroom of an average teenager. It's dark in the windowless Carmel, but you can see outside via a panoramic screen. It has tablet-like devices that allow operators to set the vehicle speed and change weapons. The side of the screen features up-to-date intelligence information and controlling the steering, weapon systems, and all manner of other operations as a friendly and familiar Microsoft Xbox controller. The Israeli armor prototype was designed with a specific user experience in mind for the Israeli Defense Forces active duty element, which is typically men and women aged 18 to 21. Any teen or 20-something who enters the hatch of the Carmel will likely feel familiar with the environment thanks to video games. The similarity is no accident. To develop their Carmel model, one of the 3 models under consideration to become the IDF's next armored fighting vehicle, Israel Aerospace Industries, IAI, engineers and managers worked with teenage gamers who critiqued the system, which originally came equipped with a state-of-the-art fighter jet-like joystick. If approved, the new weapons platform would be operated by the dual thumbsticks, triggers, bumpers, and buttons of a video game handset. Quote, they wanted something lighter and more portable, said Mir Shabtai, general manager of IAI's robotics systems operations, which is responsible for the project. Shabtai noted that the drivers wanted the ability to bring the controller into their lap, for instance, instead of using fixed mounted controls. From teenagers up to pre-military guys and guys who are after their service, we let each one play with the Carmel simulation and define what kind of skills and what kind of accessories we should use. And according to that, we developed the whole system. So this is it. Obviously, it's a prototype, so it wouldn't necessarily look exactly like that when it was finished. And you wonder how susceptible these bits of kit are to damage from, say, mine. If that vehicle is hit by mine, would it be easy to knock this out? And if those are knocked out rather than more mechanical pieces of equipment that might have more durability, what does that say about the survivability of something? But nonetheless, as far as usability is concerned, this is an interesting move. Colonel Udi Zur, battalion commander of the IDF's 7th Armoured Brigade, said he had already seen the advantages of optimizing technology for his younger soldiers, such as when his brigade recently introduced a new command and control technology. Quote, I don't want to say it took them 4 minutes, but maximum it took them 4 hours, Suhr said. They are far more willing to experiment. They are much less afraid of technology. It comes to them naturally. It's not exactly like playing Fortnite, but something like that. And amazingly, they bring their skills to operational effectiveness in no time. I'll tell you the truth, I didn't think it could be reached so quickly. Shabtai believed there's a simple explanation. Quote, they know exactly the position of those buttons and they can reach much better performances with that system, he said. The controller is just the interface. The whole idea is to present a sophisticated technology in a way they can deal with. So you're going to get this new generation of people coming through, crew people, who are going to be, if you are creating pieces of equipment with that in mind, with that kind of usability that you'd see on games consoles in mind, then these kids, if you like, or these adults coming through who have had that childhood and adolescence are going to be so much quicker to pick up how these things work. I used design principles from video games as well, using familiar icons and layouts to display information. The screens contain much of the same info one would find when playing Fortnite or Apex Legends, including a map, a tally of ammo stores, and a list of available weapons. It's also displayed in a way one would expect to see while dropping into Call of Duty Warzone, with relevant information framing the crew's view. Of course, here, the screen displays the reality outside with live targets and real weapons. But it's not the first time this has happened. In 2018, US Navy's USS Colorado submarine went into service equipped with an Xbox controller to operate its periscope. In 2014, Xbox controllers were used to control Boeing's high-energy laser mobile demonstrator in a test for the US military. And in 2008, a team of military and private industry engineers announced their attempts to use Nintendo Wii controllers with bomb disposal robots, so on and so forth. There's a bit more information on that, but we'll go to this next bit just down here. It says, the AI system, artificial intelligence system for Carmel, was reinforced and trained using thousands of scenarios that the technology generates, according to Moshe Butel, 44, who leads the algorithm group. One of the ways the team developed this, I'd just be of interest to any of you former servicemen out there. I know there's a few of you on my threads. Just what you think when you see what there's an algorithm group. What's going on here? Anyway, one of the ways the team developed this technology was by grinding StarCraft 2, that's a video game, mixed in with a few other games such as Doom to reach the AI different strategies for navigation, teach the AI different strategies for navigation, target detection, weapon selection, and other autonomous capabilities. He and his team also wrote what he called reinforcement agents, but which gamers call bots, to beat the games. So after only 2 weeks, Butel said that his bots performed 20 to 30% better than humans in figuring out how to get from point A to point B while fighting several enemies. He defined better as getting to the endpoint without getting hurt. The algorithm for the armor vehicle lives on the Unity software engine, an engine that also powers games like Hearthstone, Monument Valley, and Cuphead. So what this means is, as it says here, it presents a vehicle. The idea is a vehicle would be actually autonomous. You'd be able to say the AI system is better able to navigate this vehicle from A to B. That is a lot better, 20 to 30% better. Then perhaps let the vehicle take over, and then you can do things like acquire targets or whatever. Make a cup of tea. I guess the future is fully autonomous machines. I mean, that seems to be where we're going, right? Not putting humans in danger. But then if you're talking about AI and AI learning, then we get onto pretty significant moral questions about where AI is going and what kind of regulation needs to be put in place to stop this world becoming Terminator films in reality. Anyway, I thought that would be of use to you guys, of interest at least. Not use. I don't know that many of you are going to be going out in one of those prototype vehicles soon. UK no longer able to manufacture large caliber gun barrels, says BAE Systems. Oops. that is a bit of an issue. And part of the problem when you have small manufacturing for vehicles, say the Challenger, when I think we only exported to one country, the Challenger 2, that's a bit of an issue. It means that you're not making it scale. It means actually there's no point getting those barrels and making them yourself because you're only making them in small quantities. So the unit price is going to be really high. So go to some other bigger manufacturer, maybe on a continent, in our case, and get them to make them and outsource that. And what that means is we're at a point where we are not making our own large caliber gun barrels. It would be, I mean, it's what everyone wants is a tank where the whole world goes, that's a really good tank, and actually we're going to buy that in. I mean, you look at what South Korea are doing with their defense industry at the moment. You look at Rheinmetall, who are fighting off the threat of the South Korean defense industry to continue making in Germany. And obviously, the US doesn't have this problem. They pretty much, although interestingly, BAE Systems does tender for US work. It's heavily involved in the US as well. But yeah, it's just really difficult when you have small scale production to be able to be competitive, which means that other countries want to buy that because actually it's cheaper, or no, it's not competitive because you're only making it on a small scale, and it is good, but it's also just as good as this competitor who is doing it a lot cheaper, and so it's a kind of a bit of arguably a vicious cycle. And UK defence, where we haven't maybe pumped enough money into, designing and creating these things in a timely fashion and at scale, it means that we're going to struggle going forward, I think. Shashank Joshi, who's the defense correspondent for The Economist here, says Ukraine's offensive is going so badly that, checks notes, Russia might be forced to use nuclear weapons. Sometimes you wish the propaganda had a tad more finesse. So this is referring to Glenn Deason, who is a Norwegian political scientist and analyst who works quite a lot on Russia Today, RT, so you can see where his loyalties lie. As Ukraine's offensive runs into a brick wall, I mean, interesting, I'm not sure that's actually happened, NATO faces a dilemma. So this is NATO's dilemma. Pursue another forever war, exacerbating the humanitarian tragedy and risk nuclear war, or two, peace negotiations addressing Russian security concern about NATO expansionism and a subsequent territorial dispute. So he's looking at that image where there's a bunch of destroyed tanks and Bradleys and whatnot, and saying, well, looks like NATO have only got two options: nuclear war or peace. And it gets into this mindset that the only option is nuclear war on the one hand, or peace, but in the terms of the Russians, which means that any nuclear power can just walk into any country in the world and do what they like. And if they're not a nuclear country, then you've got to do peace with them. So technically, this is advocating Russia's ability to go into every country in the world, invade it, and then sue for peace and get that country type thing. And everyone else should just sit back and allow them to do that, because otherwise it's NATO expansionism, so on and so forth. If it was going so badly, you wouldn't have to resort to nuclear. So I think that in itself is a bit of an admission that this guy's probably afraid of the coming counteroffensive, rather than seeing this image is truly representative of Russia's capabilities and chances in the forthcoming counteroffensive, or the present counteroffensive. Right, Prigozhin, again, he's all over the news at the moment. Things are hotting up between him and Shoigu. Shoigu wants control over the mercenaries, wants them to be signed up. Today we saw that the Chechen mercenaries have signed up with Shoigu. There's a bit of a tete-a-tete between Ramzan Kadyrov and Yevgeny Prigozhin recently, and that's been bubbling away. And of course, between Prigozhin and Shoigu and the Russian MOD. So here it says Prigozhin has crossed yet another red line. This time he simply warned, if Shoigu tries to take over with Wagner PMC, Shoigu will die. This statement was made in response to Russian Ministry of Defense deciding to to make all volunteer units to be under Russian armed forces subordination. Prigozhin says he only followed Surovikin's orders, and the latter is the only sensible general. There are three possible reasons for mentioning the general like that. One, Surovikin already has tense relations with Gerasimov, head of the Russian General Staff. He might be fired together with Wagner, and it is a question of making the first move. Two, this can give him some space for maneuvering when the time comes. If it comes to that, negotiations between Surovikin and Prigozhin could be held. The former would promise to obey some requirements. The latter would be able to exit the situation without losing his dignity. Three, Prigozhin is just cynically using Surovikin. Who knows what's going on there, and what I mean. Goodness me, it wouldn't surprise me if Prigozhin's trying to make moves on getting Surovikin to defect to Wagner in some way. But yeah, all this kind of stuff, of course, is good for the Ukrainians. You know, get your popcorn, sit back and watch it, because if these guys are fighting amongst each other, it's going to make their defensive efforts all the more problematic. This is a shocker. I'm trying to work out what really is on this hedgehog. So, pure Russian sadism. They've attached a mine to the back of a hedgehog. Yeah, and if that is indeed what is going on here, that is horrific. That poor hedgehog. But I can't quite see what has been tied. It looks to be covered with leaves to you know, disguise a small armament placed on the back. I don't know how that would be triggered, but yeah, if that is the case, then you know, and finally, a bit of, because you know, being a philosopher of religion, I love to talk about how religion can be co-opted and used by people. Chris Owicki here says pacifism is a heresy, according to a new ruling by an ecclesiastical court of the Russian Orthodox Church, the ROC. The ruling, said to have been directed personally by Patriarch Kirill, has been made against an anti-war priest who was convicted and fined for advocating peace. What you find here is, I mean, I know a lot of you are going to be sort of very religious and whatnot, so I don't want to. This isn't anything to do with the truth of religion or not. This is to do with how humans codify rules. So a lot of holy books are about making moral rules, right? And then saying, which is like, this is what I want society to be like. So how can I make that more persuasive? I know if I have God saying it, right? So you do this, and then you codify all your moral proclamations with a divine voice. And that's what if you look at all the holy books, they're kind of like, you should do this, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this. It's, you know, it's just telling you. I mean, the Hebrew Bible's got 613 mitzvot, so that, you know, those are rules, and that's not talking about the different moral codes within there. These are just the smaller rules. You have the Decalogue, and you have all these different rule codes, covenant code, but they're just a load of rules, right? And if you say, and they come from God, then you're like, okay, now that's codified. That I could bore you about how Josiah did this in reforms in the Hebrew Bible. Exactly what happened. And it's like, this is what I think how we should reform. And I found this scroll in the temple wall, and it turns out that God said this, right? And this is it's amazing. This is exactly what is going on here, which is like, okay, we want a rule. We don't want priests to be able to say, and it's not so much God saying this, is just heresy, as in you can be done, is heretical. But it's the same kind of principle, which is like religiously rule breaking to do this. So you can't even, and you can probably find even more basis for this kind of pacifism in the Bible than not. I don't know. You can justify anything in the Bible, I'd say. But so you got a chap saying, "Yeah, I don't want to support this war," and then saying, "Oh, it turns out that's heresy. You'd be burned at the stake for it, or whatever." Yeah. The ruling has been made against John Burdin, the rector of the Church of the Resurrection of Christ in the village of Karabanavo, near Kostroma in western Russia. Just if you want to know where that is, that's where it is. The ruling states that, quote, the pacifism with which the priest Burdin tries to shield himself from accusations against him is not compatible with the actual teachings of the Orthodox Church. In other words, is not compatible with the actual teachings of of God, if you like, in particular, as set out in the fundamentals of the social concept. Quote, pacifism has been present in heretical doctrines at various epochs of church history. Such heretical doctrines apparently include the entire Gospel of Mark. So there you go. He is also accused of violating various canonical rules requiring obedience to authority, such as Rule 84 of the Holy Apostles. Quote, if any man vex a king or a prince, not according to righteousness, let him be punished. Who defines according to righteousness, though? And if he be of the clergy, let him be expelled from the holy ranks. But if he be a layman, let him be excommunicated from the communion of the church. Burdin, a native of Odessa in Ukraine, is also accused by the church court of pseudo-pacifism as he criticized the actions of the Russian, not Ukrainian authorities, and in particular kept quiet about the auto de fe arranged in his hometown of Odessa, the mass burning of people who had advocated preservation of Russian peace, which went unpunished. So this is a reference to the 2nd of May 2014 fire in the Odessa Trade Union's house, which caused 42 deaths and effectively ended a pro-Russian attempt to take over the city. I want to talk about this because this is actually a really important part of the build up to the whole from 2014 onwards, and how the Donbass, what you have with the Donbass was actually attempted elsewhere in a number of places, but it failed elsewhere. But they managed to wrest control from Ukraine of the Donbass. But Odessa was a key place, and then they had this fire. 42 people died, and then that kind of put an end to it. But a lot of pro-Russians or Westerners with pro-Russian sentiment or pro-Kremlin sentiment see this as a really terrible thing and often misinterpret how it happened. Not misinterpret, but don't even have the facts straight about what happened there. Anyways, I'll say that for another segment. So his quote, so his pacifism is imaginary, one-sided. It clearly shows his anti-Russian political position, which is perceived as unacceptable in our country. And what is important to emphasize, sorry, my fingers are terrible, radically divergent from the position of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is undoubtedly known to him. Burdin's offense was to have given a sermon preaching against the recently launched invasion of Ukraine and to have posted anti-war statements on the parish website. We quote, we Christians do not dare to stand aside when a brother kills a brother, a Christian kills a Christian. Let's not repeat the crimes of those who welcomed the actions of Hitler on the 1st of September 1939. We cannot bashfully close our eyes and call black white, evil good, say that Abel was probably wrong in provoking his older brother. End quote. That's what Burdin said. So Burdin was arrested by police on the same day as his sermon, having probably been denounced by one of his parishioners. He was charged with inspiring the parishioners of the church with information about the presence of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine, ongoing shelling of Ukrainian cities, Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, etc., or Kharkov, murders of residents of Ukraine, brothers and sisters in Christ, as well as posting information with campaign images on the website. According to the indictment, he was tried within 3 days and convicted and fined a sum of 35,000 rubles, $423, and for the offence of having discredited the Russian army. After the conviction, Burdin tried in March 2023 to transfer to the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, but was refused permission to do so by his Russian Orthodox Church superiors. He subsequently resigned from the ROC and was banned from preaching ahead of his church trial in June. Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who's also said to have KGB, has formerly been in the KGB, is said to have played a personal role in the proceedings against Burdin. This isn't surprising, as Kirill, reputedly a former KGB agent, is a pillar of the Putin regime and a strong supporter of the war. Christian nationalism is a fundamental element of the ideology of Putinism. The Russian Orthodox Church has been engaged at all levels in legitimizing the war. I mean, this is where I could have a massive sidebar about Christian nationalism, but I won't. An editorial in a church publication in February 2023 called for punishment for liberal clerics who made a, quote, violent, traitorous address to our homeland and the Russian army. For this address is a knife in the back of the Russian warrior who is liberating the world. And we've, of course, seen what liberating the world from Nazism looks like. It looks like destroying entire cities and reducing them to rubble. That's their idea of liberation. Anyway, knife in the back of the Russian warrior who is liberating the world from Nazism, as our fathers, grandfathers, and great grandfathers heroically did during a great patriotic war. Burdin's preaching and pacifism in general are clearly seen by the church leadership as being intolerable threats to that position. Really interesting to see how liberty in Russia doesn't exist. Freedom of speech doesn't exist. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous when you get pro-Russian voices claiming that Ukraine is, clamping down on freedom of speech when they make a kind of rule about what you can say on social media, given like operational security and whatnot. And it's like Russia is just absolute antithesis of freedom of speech. It's insane. You can't even call it a war still. So it's just complete hypocrisy when you get that kind of approach. But here we have someone trying to give a moral speech in a sermon and being punished for doing so, unable to say what he wants. So yeah, we got freedom of speech as long as you say exactly what I want you to say. And I'll just end with reference to, Russia and freedom of speech. Head of RT, Margarita Simonyan, our favorite propagandist, used Tucker Carlson's rude firing from Fox News to prove that freedom of speech does not exist in the West or anywhere else. To her chagrin, she was ambushed with horrific examples of what is currently happening in Russia. The hypocrisy there is just insane. To have a go at the US, where you've got a private company where he said things were demonstrably incorrect, legally problematic, and then slagged off the executives of his own company. I mean, you expect him to survive. Imagine if she slagged off, I don't know, Putin or the top brass in RT, and then so on and so forth. You think she would still keep a job? No. So it's obviously complete nonsense. So we'll just see what the response from some of her panelists were. So she says, in recent years, the entire Western world, and I'll read the subtitles to you, was transformed to resemble North Korea. It's just absolutely ridiculous. All dissent is immediately crushed. Absolutely ridiculous. The instant it becomes notable, she says, "Listen, we have more freedom of speech here." So I just want to pause that. More freedom of speech in Russia is ridiculous. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now in Russia. I will be arrested. I can on YouTube now. I can be put out some pro-Russian stuff. I could spin everything pro-Russian, and I wouldn't be arrested by the UK authorities. It's just, it wouldn't happen, right? So we can. They can't even, as I say, can't even say the word war in Russia, and yet she's comparing the West to North Korea. She said, "I'm honestly bored even talking about it. It's also obvious," he says, this other chap, "freedom of speech does not exist, period," she says. "I may be mistaken," says this guy back. So he's the guy, that major critic, and he brings some receipts. "I may be mistaken, but here is how I see one of your functions. You're sort of a feedback loop with the government." So he's talking about Simonian to her. "They pay attention to you. You're not opposition. You support the government. But if you sound the alarm, it means that the excesses are so egregious that it should be noticed and perhaps reconsidered. I have a question. Don't you think that right now it's the time for you to sound an alarm?" So he said to her, "Look, when the shit really hits a fan, when things are going really proper bad and you say something about it, actually the Kremlin listen to you. So you're in a pretty strong position to affect the Kremlin and their decisions and the information space that they occupy. Now, you should be sounding an alarm now because of," and he's just about to detail some of these examples. "It's time for you to sound the alarm," he says. "Here are a few examples." Simonian, "About what?" "In Krasnoyarsk," he says, "deputy of the local city council Igor Grinyov was found guilty of discrediting the Russian army for saying that the residents of Kherson were left behind after they placed their hopes in Russia. I don't see this as discrediting the army. I see pain in these words and can easily imagine you saying this during one of the programs." Simonian says, "Yes, I've said that." Another one is a notorious case. He continues, of the theatre director Berkovich. She's held in confinement for a theatre play that ran for 2 years, having been approved by the Ministry of Culture and other agencies. Then, retroactively, they found some crime in it, and she is being brought to hearings in handcuffs like a criminal. My third example is a case of Sergei Vidal. He used to work for the police department. His telephone conversations were wiretapped. It wasn't even related to him. His boss was under an investigation. In those phone conversations, he openly spoke to his friends and relatives about what he thought of the situation in Ukraine. They labeled it as discrediting and spreading fakes. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. There was also an Orwellian moment, says this guy. Since he was being wiretapped, prosecutors claimed that the policeman who was listening in experienced feelings of concern, fear, and vulnerability. It turns out we have to censor our words and thoughts, even in our conversations with parents and kids. Where is this boundary? Where will we cross over and become a totalitarian country? Just absolutely, and he goes on to talk, is this our vision of the future? Absolutely nails it back. I mean, those are 3 really insignificant cases as well, all things considered, or at least, a drop in the ocean of what is happening in Russia. And Simonyan, I can't imagine she's not aware of this. I'm sure she knows. She's just towing the party line because it's in her best interest to do so. But what's interesting is this guy's allowed to say this as well. And you wonder whether this is a kind of turning tide. Is the tide turning in what propagandists are saying, are allowed to say? Is this putting multiple narratives out there to confuse people? How will the general public watching this feel? I'm sure that they will know that they can't say stuff openly, but then back those who are old enough, back 30, 40 years ago, this might have been fairly similar. So, there's a kind of, hey, we're used to it kind of approach where, oh, it's just back to the old ways. And it's not as bad as it might appear to someone, from our point of view, born and brought up in a country where you can say what you like and you've been able to say what you like all your life. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting kind of bit to add on to the situation with the priest having his own freedom of speech completely curtailed. There you go. Freedom of speech is a right minefield, to excuse the kind of military pun, but it's particularly problematic in Russia. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care of yourselves, and I will speak to you tomorrow.